Hey everybody, this is Matthew, aka Sinister Deva, and this is part one of advanced shipbuilding. In part one here, we're going to cover the basic structure of a ship, how to kind of stitch it together to make sure that it's nice and structurally sound. Um, Part two, which will be in a separate video, will be all the little extras that go on a ship, heat sinks, batteries, the little accessories that really make a ship come together. And then step three will be creating a launch platform for the ship so we can get it into orbit with plenty of fuel and get it off to Minmus for some interplanetary fun. Now, this ship is the Marauder. I do have this up on KerbalX, and I'll include the link down below. And I just wanted to load it to illustrate some of the basic concepts that make a large ship easy when you're kind of just building the structure. So of course the three main components that you need to start off with are the command pod. You want to figure out pretty early on where that's going to be. You need your fuel. Luckily most of the ships you'll make are just pure fuel with some accessories tied onto it like the ore canisters here. And then you need your engines. Now, quickly about the engines, when it comes to bigger ships, I do find having multiple sets of rockets are often helpful. I'll usually have some type of central rocket system. These will not have gimbals, the strongest ones. Without gimbals, I find when you have all of them active, just provide a little bit more stability. And I really only use the central ones, the main engines, when I'm doing really long burns, like trying to get to a different planet or out to Minmus from Kerbin or something like that. So on this particular ship, we have secondary and tertiary engines. So it's really just because of how big it is. So I'll use different combinations of each depending on, the actual burn requirement. If I'm just adjusting my attitude, and it's like a 25 meter per second gain, I don't need to use, these big vector engines that are going to cover that distance and, or rather that acceleration, in a matter of a fraction of a second. So what we're actually going to do is start off building just a bit smaller version of the Marauder, but it'll look and feel very similar, but it'll be a little bit more stable. But like the Marauder, you'll be able to land it on a moon, refuel, and then go do whatever you want. The Marauder literally can go across the solar system by itself, pretty much unassisted, as long as you can make it to a moon and refuel. So let's start off with that. I do find starting, at least personally, with the engines is a little bit easier for my sake. So what we'll do is start off there. Now on the Marauder, I had four kind of angled engines off of the central ones. We're just going to do two on either side for this one because it is going to be a lot smaller than the Marauder. So I'll just line these up. And once you get a lot of these kind of techniques, it really does help to be a bit more creative. I find the more you don't just look at function, but also look at aesthetics, the more you're going to end up with something that definitely performs practically, but also something that looks good doing it. And I definitely get a lot of enjoyment out of that. And that's really why I like building spaceships as opposed to, say, rockets. And certainly rockets are a solution you can use to do anything you need to. But they all kind of look the same. They all kind of perform the same. I like to see what shapes really come together to make something that looks good as well as is usable. So I'm using the cargo bay here. One thing, and I do suggest making a pre-done cargo bay with control wheels. I usually put batteries in them as well. If you create that group before you start on the big ships, all the ships are going to need those control systems. It's best to have them in a central place. So I usually just have it pre-done, but I'll kind of save that for another day. So we want to make sure we have some monoprop. This thing will, of course, have some monoprop-based jets so that it can dock with pretty much anything. Nice command module. Yeah, you know what? Let's put a crew compartment here. Get extra people on board. All right, so we got the kind of middle section to build off of. Oops. Come on, there we go. All right, so off to a good start here. Now, like the Marauder, I am going to put some ore canisters on the sides. This is aesthetically pleasing, at least to me, as well as it makes a lot of practical sense to have some ore canisters on board. Maybe just one more on each side. There we go. Close it off. That was weird. We'll have this nice tapered edge. All right. So let's figure out where this needs to be. Now, as you can see, we got the lines overlapping here. So I'm going to push that back a little bit. And again, this is one of those cases of form and function meeting. So if we just move it back slightly one, it no longer shows. And then these guys are a pretty good distance away. All right. Not bad. Not bad. Well, you know what? That's a little bit long. Let's take out the crew cabin. I changed my mind. You can change your mind whenever you want. It's like a Bob Ross painting. The canvas is yours. All right, so we're going to put some of these. All right, so those are definitely off a bit. Bring them down one more. All right, good. So as I mentioned, these are going to be kind of the primary engines. These are going to be gimbaled. For some kind of extra boost, I want one that's not gimbaled. Theoretically, I could just use rapiers. I'm going to use the arrow spikes. The power output is very similar, almost identical, but these do not have a gimbal. The only real reason that I'm choosing these over just, deselecting the gimbal on the rapiers is because it looks better. And that might sound silly, but when you see this thing in, an orbit, it's going to have this nice long middle tail, and then, the rapier exhaust is a bit shorter. So it really does look better. Now I need to attach the secondary engines here. I'm putting a battery here to make it a little bit more structurally sound. The part that I'm going to use here, this quad coupler, I find kind of sways a little bit when it's connected right to this big fuel pod. So I'm just going to put something in the way of it, which is the battery. That's just going to add a little bit more structure to it. And I'll bury it here a little bit. And of course, there's the added advantage of having, an extra battery on there. All right, and good. So one other thing, and really just the reason that I changed this, 90 degrees so that it's in a bit of a diamond shape. I do find there's a little bit of stability in orienting your different types of engines differently. So because these are linear up and down, and then these are angles with respect to those, it's going to behave a little bit differently, and usually in my experience, it's a bit more stable. All right, so I'll just put these on. All right, looking pretty good so far. Not bad at all. All right, next thing. Now the Marauder has these kind of tail fins. These are going to be, side fins. These are going to have a surprising practical use to them when it comes to the actual launch of the ship. Now, and really just the advanced technique in launching big stuff. One of the things I like to do is put these large couplers on the sides here. Now this will be good for docking, yes. Wait, if I can actually get these things rotated the right way. Yay, finally. So these, while good for docking, are also going to be very helpful to actually launch the ship. and we'll have some boosters attached to it. Of course, there's the decouplers that you can use. This is just a bit of a different way. I find this is a really great way of launching large ships, is to have them actually attached using these things, the large couplers. So you'll see that in kind of the third episode. So now we have the kind of basic structure. You can see it already looks the same kind of basic shape as the bigger Marauder. So we have the basic design. We have the pod, the fuel, the engines. Those are the basic components. What we need to do now is make it structurally sound, and this is what I refer to as stitching. So I will, make the mock-up, get everything in position to where it needs to be, and then pull everything apart. And what we're going to do is use the structural, what are they called? Of course, I use a million of them. I don't know what they're called. Strut connectors. Why not? So we're going to use a fair number of those to stitch these pieces together, make them all structurally one piece. And then we're also going to tie in the fuel in a very similar way. So we'll start with the stitching with the strut connectors. Now make sure you still have mirror selected. That way, as you can see, it's going on both sides. You don't need to do this 4 times. You only need to do it twice. And that's going to save you a whole bunch of time. So for every, let's call, this thing as a length, for every about a length and a half or so, you want to put one of these strut connectors, and we're going to do both the bottom and the top. Now you want to put them a little bit below where their top line is. That way, and this is purely aesthetic, when you recombine everything together into one piece, it's going to look like this nice, solid piece without any connectors showing or anything like that. So like that, maybe one more at the nose here. So that's good. All right, so we got the top of these done, so we'll do these. And this doesn't have to have, too many, just one here, one here, done. So we're already half done the stitching, so this is obviously really quick when we're talking about having just, a smaller ship like this. And this is pretty big. This is bigger than the space shuttle. Not big in terms of what you can do in KSP, and I'll include a link to my KerbalX page down below so that you can actually see some of the bigger stuff that I've made, including the Marauder if you want to download it. And once we finish this thing up in part 3, I'll upload that to Kerbal as well, so you can just use this right out of the gate in case you don't actually want to go through the trouble of building it now that I've kind of started the process for you. Alright, so stitching is almost done. So it doesn't need to be too heavy-handed. I probably put more than I need to usually. And one of the good things about being able to download user ships and stuff like that, and if you download the Marauder or anything else I've made, I definitely encourage you to pull it apart. That way you can see how it's actually made, how I've interconnected everything, and certainly take those ideas. They're mostly stuff that I've learned from other people as well. So. All right, so we got all the stitching done. So this will be structurally sound. You can put it back together and test it. Basically just put it on the runway, and if it blows up, you need to stitch it more, and if it doesn't blow up, you're good. But for the purposes of this, I've done this enough times that I know this should be pretty good. We will test it out though. So now we want to do is tie in fuel systems. These are technically individual pieces, and while the rockets will still pull from all of the fuel, we want it to be uniform, and that way when we're maneuvering in in space, or we're trying to land on a moon, the fuel distribution is even. We don't need to realign it. It's not going to act as ballast one way or the other. It's just even throughout the ship. And if you did not know, how you do that is simply put one in one direction and then put one in the other direction. So that way fuel from this is going to go that way, fuel from this is going to go that way, so it's just going to be even at the end of things. And then we'll do the same thing with these, and you just want to do it for every major fuel component you have. Alright, so let's see where we're at. So this is stitched together, this is stitched together, we have fuel going from everything, so that's good. Alright, so let's put this thing back together. We'll test how structurally sound it is, make sure it's good to go, and that'll be the end of part 1. Alright, looks good. And you know what? I forgot the most important piece of all. There we go. That's looking better. And I'm not gonna put fuel in this, in these wings, though you can. This is again pretty much purely aesthetic, but it looks really nifty, and I'm gonna do it, and you can't talk me out of it. All right, there we go. So looks a lot like the Marauder, doesn't it? So let's say this is the Ravager. There we go. Just make something up. Doesn't really matter. User license, right? Just like Bob Ross says. It's your painting, your canvas. You do whatever you want with it. All right. So we got the basics. Let's see. Make sure this thing is structurally sound. Just need a pilot. And I did not put wheels on it. I don't care about that. I just need to make sure it doesn't blow up when it hits the runway. And failed load because I'm using an old version. I am doing this in, I think, 1.2.2. I started the newest one, 1.3, I think 0.1 or something like that. There's actually a known bug apparently with that version, and the larger ships tend to blow up as soon as they're on the launch pad, or at least that I found. It was like a wave went through them and a piece always blew off. So I contacted KSP support. They were kind enough to let me know that I can roll back my version, and that the future updates will have a fix for that. So I'm looking forward to that. But that's why I'm building in a bit of an older version. So as you can see, my thing's laying on the runway, the Ravager, as I named it. It didn't blow up. It's not, wobbling or anything like that sitting there. So it's structurally sound. And just cause, let's test the engines, make sure they're working. And like I said, the rocket trail of the Rapiers is much shorter, so at least to me it looks very cool, particularly in space when you're not going to see all the exhaust. It's going to look really cool. And she's skidding across the ground. Fuel is pulling equally, so we know our fuel systems were set up correctly. So she's structurally sound. She has all the major components. So that's ready for part 2, which is again going to be putting on the finer touches, which is all the little gizmos and gadgets and stuff like that. But that's it for part 1. Hope you learned a little bit of some of the stuff that I've learned. Again, visit me on KerbalX. I have tons of cool stuff there. And yeah, we'll see you next time.